Well, hello, friends. I'm feeling better this afternoon. Took my steroids, my first round. Got another painkiller. So, I did a couple things. I just recently finished my second. I think I've already showed you my first work of art. This one probably isn't all quite glued down yet. In fact, I feel, nope, that rock is not. But you might notice, like right in the middle, I have a matchbox. Really nice matchbox with what I think are herons. And so just trying to incorporate, oops, really not ready, a variety of items into these works. I'm going to kind of go with what they call the found item approach, I guess. Found object. I don't know how many objects besides rocks and shells I'll actually use. I see I got to use a little bit more tough glue on this one shell. I didn't really get it down very well. I wanted to share that with you. I'm enjoying this. I could see this being a real fun, active part of my looming retirement. Teaching, as far as I know, the world's faith traditions for the last time. Oh my goodness. Am I talking about the right class? Oh yeah, I am. Okay, so, wow, that rock. Anyway, I tried a little too soon. Maybe I'll bring it in. It's smaller than the first one I made. But you know, I'm going to do a variety, sizes and so on. I'm looking forward to experimenting a lot with that. Seems like there was one other thing I was going to share. Well, maybe just right to the reading for today would have been Knowing Noah or Not. And I like this chapter. I like the comparisons that happen. Here's a couple lines I wish I'd put in. I only noticed as I read today, I thought, well, I could have a little bit more fun. I tried to have fun with some of the prose here. Bottom of 114, after discussing the fact that Genesis says that God, the Lord, was sorry that he had made Adam on the Eretz, on the land, and it grieved him to his heart, which for a long time has been a passage that's fascinated me as one who, well, I guess I have, Ethan in here to challenge me on what we call open theism. And you can't build a theology, I'll readily acknowledge, on, this verse or that. But it's worth noting, right, that here in Genesis 6, we read that the Holy One, the Lord, this is the holy name of God, Hashem, the name, was sorry, grieved that he had even made human beings. This is a text in which the holy name is utilized, and something I mentioned in the book is that sort of, I will say ironically, the early narratives, especially in Genesis, where this holy name is utilized, the name that would eventually become, we might call sacrosanct in the Jewish tradition, like super sanctified, such that, it's not spoken, and it finally even avoided being written, and in its place was the Hebrew term Adonai, or Lord. But it's the holy name that sometimes we pronounce now Yahweh. I think we've talked about that a little bit. The old school pronunciation was Jehovah. So it's that God identified in that way as the one who plants a garden in Genesis 2, who scoops up some dirt into a human form, and breathes into it to make that form come alive. It's that same one who observed that it's not good for Adam to be alone. So we've already talked about that. But again, it's this identification of God as Lord, in English, all caps. I just secured a free copy of the Jerusalem Bible. I've mentioned it in some classes, whether or not I've mentioned it in ours. And I had this feeling, without having a copy, that the Jerusalem Bible, which is a Catholic edition, I wasn't sure exactly when it came out. I think I usually tell people late 50s, sometime in the 60s. Well, it turns out 1966. I got a beautiful encased edition for free. You know, folks, we get free books up there. You know where that shelf is, and people bring in new ones, retired ministers. And look, I'm almost 70 and I'm still checking. You know, I'm also trying to get rid of books, but man alive, a copy of the Jerusalem Bible. And it does use the term Yahweh, and it's the only English translation I know that uses that term to translate what we call the Tetragrammaton, the four-lettered Hebrew name. The old school pronunciation, Jehovah, can be found in, if nowhere else, in Jehovah's Witnesses Bible, the New World Translation. So anyway, all of these early texts that narrate God as Hashem, the name, the holy name, also tend to be very anthropomorphic. And the irony, I mean, is that the name has come to mean that which is utterly mysterious and transcendent, God beyond all imaginations and knowing and verbiage. And yet in these early stories, it's God as eminently accessible, very human-like, so that it's this one who can say, it's not good for the human to be alone. I'll make a partner for the Adam, and you get all these other animals being, you know, scooped up out of the earth first and brought to the human to see what the human would name them. And we've talked about all that. So in Genesis 6, it is again Yahweh who is sorry that he made Adam, suggesting that Yahweh did not know how bad it was going to get with human beings. It grieved him in his heart. Bottom of 114, I have written at the bottom paragraph, God's grief, question mark. Can God grieve? Indeed, is it any surprise that once again in Genesis we encounter a notably anthropomorphic or human-shaped rendering of the God who goes by the name of YHWH, or Adonai, the Lord? Well, what I wish I'd put in between God's grief and can God grieve up there in that first sentence is, good grief. I mean, wouldn't this have been great? God's grief? Good grief! Exclamation point. Can God grieve? I think the editor would have let that go, let that stand. And then, so then we have, later in that paragraph, actually on the top of 115, just showing you the things that I wish I'd written. So near the end of that paragraph, so we're up at the top of 115, if God was reacting to the depth and breadth of human evil by sending a flood, then apparently God had not anticipated, let alone known eternally, that things would get so bad as this. I don't know what I have to do to convince Ethan to see it properly. As bad as this. At least on the face of it, the Genesis passage presents God as considerably taken aback. Not the most common of phrases, but you know, if somebody is taken aback, they're quite surprised. So I wish I'd written presents God as considerably taken aback, and then dash, and the world takes a bath. Missed out on that one too. Or all, you know, for all I know, I had it in the original manuscript and maybe the editor took it out, but I don't think so. I don't know for sure. So, you know, there's, I'm going to look at a footnote here. Top of 116, such a God is described in Genesis 6 would not be the sort of God who knows all things perfectly, eternally, timelessly, and yet it is that sort of God that through the centuries most Muslims and Christians have assumed God to be. And then we have footnote 2. Going back there to footnote 2, just to tie in with some of our earlier discussions. Footnote 2, this is on page 215. While Jewish tradition could, to a considerable extent, be included along with Islam and Christianity on this point about God's, utter omniscience and so on, I hesitate to do so. There is too much material in the Talmud, to say nothing of the Kabbalah, the later Jewish mystical writings, well, in fact, it says Judaism's body of mystical literature, that renders God in profoundly interactive and often anthropomorphic imagery, human-shaped imagery. For humans, we don't know the future. We can have our educated guesses, but the future is open for us. We don't know it with any certainty, of course. So this often anthropomorphic imagery, resisting the tendency toward abstract perfections like timelessness and perfect omniscience. I assume this is partly due to the often strikingly anthropomorphic portrayals of God in the Tanakh. Remember, Tanakh is Torah, Nevi'im, which is the prophets, and Ketuvim, which is the writings, TNK, with vowels interposed. So portrayals of God in the Tanakh, especially, as I've noted, in the Yahwistic tradition. That is, stories of God, especially in the, we'll say in the first 5 books of the Bible, where the term, this holy name, is utilized. Though rabbis were sensitive to the problems of thinking of God in all too human terms, they continued to engage such portrayals creatively and insightfully. That's a nice footnote, don't you think? Also, a couple of things I want to say. One is that, as I mentioned here, but I haven't made this point in class, really, in the Quran and for Islam generally, the ultimate category, religious category, in reference to human beings, is prophet. I mentioned already earlier, I think in these previous lectures, that for Judaism, it's rabbi, it's the sage, it's the scholar of the writings. In Islam, it's the prophet. So where rabbis might argue over the meaning of any biblical text, right? And while they might eventually come to the bold assertion that the history of their wrestling with the text and with one another is itself Torah. It is oral Torah. It is revelation. It's a very different kind of revelation, because it's a revelation that occurs precisely in and through and in the midst of human interpretation and debate. Fascinating, huh? In Islam, the prophet is the ultimate category. And I see I'll go another minute with this one, then I'll pause. So that so many people, so many men, and it is men, who are identified as prophets in the Quran that we wouldn't typically think of as prophets. Adam comes to mind immediately. Adam is identified as a prophet. Noah is a prophet. I don't know that the Bible really uses that language of him. In fact, I'm quite sure it does not. David does get called a prophet in the New Testament, so we'll let that one slide. But I think even Solomon, for the Quran, is a prophet. And, of course, the seal of the prophets, S-E-A-L, is Muhammad. And the seal here basically means both the last prophet and the one that really kind of, caps it off, seals off this prophetic ministry in history. He's the last one. Jesus, of course, is also a prophet, and I think that typically would be considered the second most important one after Muhammad. There are interesting streams of Islam, historically that may even have elevated Jesus above Muhammad, but that's untypical. But certainly he's a prophet. So that's the category, prophet. And for the Quran, the prophet's, plural possessive here, message is always pretty much the same. There is one God. Human beings owe their utter submission to this God. God has made the divine will known. All humans, it is their duty to be Muslim, to be submissive to God. There might be a slight variation from prophet to prophet given different historical circumstances, but generally for Islam, the prophets come with essentially the same message, regardless of when or where they live.